Yesterday, former President Trump issued a forceful statement calling for de-escalation of the war in Ukraine. Let's watch.
The situation in Ukraine is very dangerous, explosive, and escalating by the day. Joe Biden's weakness and incompetence has brought us to the brink of nuclear war, and now Biden is doing what he said 10 months ago would lead to World War III. He is sending in American tanks. It's far past the time for all parties involved to pursue a peaceful end to the war in Ukraine before this already horrific catastrophe spirals out of control and ends up leading, indeed, to World War III. And this would be a war like no other war, because this would be a nuclear war. As I have said many times before, Russia's invasion of Ukraine would have never happened if I was in the White House. Not even thinkable, not even a possibility. We must end this ridiculous war and demand peace in Ukraine now before it gets worse. And believe it or not, it would be easy to do. It would be very easy to do.
So Trump there is saying things that you and I have said numerous times on this show for months. Isn't it interesting that Trump is the political figure with instincts on this issue that seem to match our instincts, that I believe match the instincts of a great many Americans in both the Republican and Democratic Party? You know, you wonder why this man has crossover appeal. We don't wonder, but some people wonder, and they can't understand the person who votes for Obama and then votes for him. They can't understand Democrats who would vote for him. They just don't get that wars are unpopular, that the American people don't want to spend money on this forever. They don't like the effect it has on energy prices and food prices. They don't see as clearly, I guess, as the blob, the clear national security rationalization for doing this. And they think that with greater pushing, you could make a peace deal happen, that the President of the United States should be working harder, even if it means Ukraine gives up something, to have a peace deal in place before it escalates to World War III. That is exactly what Trump just said.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know entirely if it's true that Putin just never would have.
Except that part is Trump bluster. I don't know if that's true, but the rest of it,
there may or may not be an argument. I don't really know. You know, was Trump doing less of the kind of NATO baiting? You know, it might be the case that even if Putin did invade while Trump was president, Trump would have declined to get involved. That is an option, of course, when Russia annexed Crimea. Obama chose not to get involved. There's certainly precedents for a U.S. non-involvement. And it does seem like Trump's traditional, more isolationist stance wouldn't have gone unchanged if he were president during the scenario, which would put us in a very different situation. And of course, everything that he said about the potential escalation into World War III is true. I think that too often the critique of U.S. military involvement in Ukraine is centered on, you know, a debate about whether or not people who want the U.S. not to be involved are humanitarian enough, care enough about the fate of the Ukrainian people, or sympathetic to Russia or Putin puppets. This debate goes all round and round in circles over here. And the one concern that never really gets addressed, and that people who defend U.S. Involvement never really contend with, is what is the worst thing that could happen? Are we inching ourselves closer? Are we turning the doomsday clock dial too close to midnight for our comfort? Even if you believe, you know, everything goes swimmingly, there's no actual conflict with Russia, direct conflict between two nuclear powers, that this is moral and justified and something we should be doing. I would feel a lot more confident in that assessment if there were any acknowledgement of how we've come close already with the claims that this missile hit Ukraine, but it turns out to be one of Ukraine's own missiles. Okay, what happens next time? What happens next time? And we already see Joe Biden making these kind of escalatory statements about how the U.S. would get involved if China were to make territorial claims in Taiwan. We saw Nancy Pelosi making this trip there and creating this kind of global escalation. Biden's had to walk back some of his statements about conflict with China and defending Taiwan because his own advisors have told him that this is a dangerous geopolitical quagmire that he's walking ourselves into. And all of this happening around the world at the same time, it just shows a real indifference to how cataclysmic the world-ending the effects of a nuclear conflict with Russia would be.
It can be morally justified to do something without being smart to do something, without being strategic. And that is the distinction I think people are missing. Because, of course, I think the Ukrainian people have a right to defend themselves. In an ideal world, would helping them, if that would be best for the entire world and for our own safety and have no downsides, then sure. But we're worried about what this is going to result in, and we're worried that this is just going to go on forever anyway. And in the long run, more people will die because we couldn't bring it to the negotiating table. And that's what Trump was outlining there. You know, it's interesting, especially because we're talking a lot lately with the new Twitter files about how obsessed with the Russia influence narrative a lot of the mainstream media was. So you can imagine a world in which Trump's ability to talk to Putin or have some kind of different outcome here in an alternate reality would have been perceived as a bad thing by the media.
Yeah.
Right? They would have said.
He's coddling Putin. He's negotiating with terrorists. You definitely can't imagine it. And look, something you said earlier about how the media doesn't understand Trump's appeal. I see comments every single day of my life in the comment sections of my video and my mentions on Twitter, et cetera, about how I would have voted for Bernie or Trump. Yeah. I would still, I would vote for Bernie or Trump. I would vote for Bernie or Trump over DeSantis. I would vote for Bernie or Trump over Marianne Williamson. I would vote for Bernie or Trump over whatever options being flung at the wall, because both of these figures had that sense of where the kind of the unspoken, the silent majority, if you will, are on issues like this one. And it would be nice if there were someone who wasn't Donald Trump who was carrying this mantle. From my perspective, he's not an advocate for the policies that I would prefer to see. But we saw what happened with the CPC letter. A couple of progressives get together and say something eminently reasonable along these lines, just warning, hey, we got to have a strategy, we have to have an exit plan. We're worried about nuclear conflict, and the liberal establishment clobbers them. Yeah.
Well, of course, Fox News' Tucker Carlson jumped into the fray after Trump's statement, taking aim at Senator Lindsey Graham for his hawkish stance on the war. Let's watch that.
We're almost in World War I type battle conditions in the East. It's impossible, in my view, to dislodge the Russians by the Ukrainians unless they have tanks. We also believe that longer-range rockets will help stop the counteroffensive that is building in the East. The goal is to dislodge the Russians from Ukraine by helping the Ukrainian military in that endeavor, give them the weapons they need to beat the Russians on the battlefield.
So there he is standing with fake war hero Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, who may be almost as liberal as Lindsey Graham. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't an impromptu press conference. It was part of a strategy. And not long after that, Joe Biden indeed dutifully sent the tanks. Now, Lindsey Graham is demanding that the Pentagon send F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. Arming the Ukrainian military with F-16s would mean direct American involvement in a war against nuclear-armed Russia. From there, it is a direct and possibly very short line to a nuclear exchange. It is lunacy. True lunacy. But it's also Lindsey Graham's stated position. He's an utterly committed neocon. Neocon politics are what he cares about to the exclusion of everything else. He has no children. He's not worried about the future.
And he's a big fan of Trump, but is also the by far the most hawkish voice in the room at any moment, and probably the most hawkish person who has access to Trump because of his sycophantic behavior, frankly, toward the former president during his time in office, and even since. I heard him the other day saying he would love to see Trump run again. Unfinished business. I guess for Lindsey, that unfinished business is war.
Does that raise questions for you about how much you can trust kind of Trump's influence if he were back in office again? You know, would voting for Trump mean that a sincere anti-war movement was here, that his foreign policy would be non-interventionist?
No.
Or are there enough people around him like Lindsey Graham who are still confident that they can probably get their way even if Trump is in office? That makes you feel like
that's the big problem with Trump. I think that's something even his ardent supporters have to concede, that his choice of the people he surrounds himself with, who then end up always, he's at odds with them, and they're back-talking him, and they're publishing tell-alls. He put Bolton in charge of foreign policy, who's an extremely hawkish voice. He picks people for other reasons, based on perceived loyalty, based on who he thought looked good on TV, who did well on Fox, not for who's sincerely committed to the foreign policy that he himself he himself is drawn to this foreign policy, but he didn't seem to pick people because they shared that ideological view, and that ended up being a huge problem. And would be, I think, I see no reason to think that wouldn't be a huge problem in a future Trump administration.
Huge.
Huge. That wraps us up for this week. Be sure to catch us over the weekend, where we will post the highlights that you may have missed over the last few days.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. And we're also available on Roku and other streaming services. So catch us over there if that's more your vibe.
See you later, everybody.
Bye-bye.